Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, your weekly exploration of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back, thank you for joining us, and welcome indeed to the first of 4 episodes for JSApril. Hashtag JSApril, go and check it out on the socials. Huge thanks to our pal, the irredeemable Shag, for inviting us to take part. JSApril, obviously, a celebration for 85 years of the Justice Society of America, and Peter and I have decided to give it the old Earth 2 podcast spin.
We most certainly have.
So, quite a lot of episodes we do on the show, we look at the legacy of a particular character name. We've done episodes on wasps, on tarantulas.
On fiddlers.
On fiddlers, yes. That was a good one. That was a really good one, listeners. And we sort of thought, right, can we find stories that either feature characters that have the same names as members of the Justice Society, or there are stories which at least allude to the names of members of the Justice Society, or maybe a member of the Justice Society meets someone else with the same name as themselves, and, you know, with a bit of mutual digging, quite a lot of digging on Peter's part, we have managed to put together a list of stories which will give us 4 episodes, 1 episode a week for April, where we have a bit of fun, some of it loosely extrapolated, some of it quite markedly sort of extrapolated, but we've managed to put together a list of stories that lets us explore in a very fun and loose way the legacy of many of the members of the Justice Society of America.
We most certainly have. In our usual portmanteau fashion, it's going to be 3 stories per episode. So strap yourself in for the entire month of April, folks.
Yep.
And when we decided to do this, we thought, what order are we going to put them in? And we thought, there's only one order we could possibly put them in, and that's the order that the characters are on the cover for the first appearance of the JSA in All-Star Comics issue 3. So from left to right, that's Atom, Sandman, Spectre, Flash, Hawkman, Dr. Fate, Green Lantern, and Hourman. But we'll also have a few extras chucked in at the end.
And if everything permits, we'll hopefully be joined by a couple of guest voices at points as well, just to mix things up and give us all a bit more of a laugh. I think I've already hinted that one of our regular guest contributors has already recorded his lines for an upcoming story, so watch out for that. So be sure to check out all the other blogs and podcasts that are taking part in JSApril. We've probably say the easiest way to find some of the stuff is checking the JSApril hashtag on Twitter, or X as it's now called, or just checking in on the website, which Shag has set up.
And there'll be a link to it in the show notes.
And on the socials, we'll do our best to share posts by pals of ours that are joining in with the whole event. So it's, at the last count, I think Shag said he had 40 different bloggers and podcasts involved. So there's going to be a lot of excellent JSApril content out there. If this is your first time listening to the Earth 2 podcast, thank you for joining us. We're delighted that JSApril has brought you here. If you're one of our regular listeners, we appreciate you as well. And hopefully you'll enjoy what we've got lined up. So, without any further ado. So, as Peter said, the first member of the JSA to be sat round the table is the Atom, the Golden Age Atom, Al Pratt. And of course, the Atom is a fine legacy in the DC universe, because obviously Ray Palmer was the Silver Age Atom, and then Ryan Choi came along much, much later. And we're all thrilling to the Atom Project, currently from DC at the moment, which features both of those Atoms and Captain Atom.
Indeed, yes.
And Captain Atom will turn up on the Earth 2 podcast eventually, don't you worry.
And don't forget the other Atom, Adam Gray, who appeared in the Suicide Squad series.
Of course, do you know what? Briefly, momentarily, I had forgotten him.
So has most of fandom, so don't worry.
Is he going to turn up in the last issue of the Atom Project? Can you imagine?
I'm imagining it right now.
We shall have to wait and see. I think issue 4 will be the next one at the point of recording. Anyway, so, the Atom, what story have we found? I think I found this one. What story are we going to read that celebrates the Atom, or at least alludes to the Atom, or lets us talk a little bit more about the Atom? Well, it's a story from issue 86 of House of Mystery, published on the 3rd of May, 1959. Cover's amazing. I think you should tell everyone very quickly about the cover, even though we're not doing that story.
Yes, in the grand tradition of the Earth 2 podcast, the cover is not related to the story we're doing. However, we're in the Arctic Sea. There are icebergs floating around, there's the deck of a ship, and there's 3 men on the deck, and they're panicking because bursting from one of the icebergs is a giant prehistoric monster. It's green, it's scaly, it's got big red eyes, it's got fins, it's got the paw coming out.
Yes.
And one of the sailors is panicking, saying,
"A strange creature frozen in an iceberg, and it's breaking through."
And there's a caption that says, "The beast has slept 1,000 years.
I could do with 1,000 years of sleep right now, listeners. I'm not going to lie. Sadly, that's not the story we're going to do. However, If there's a House of Mystery podcast out there that's done this story, please identify to yourselves and we'll tell everyone about that as soon as we possibly can. Makes me want to buy a complete run of House of Mystery, this cover.
It certainly does. I want to know what prehistoric monsters were walking the Earth 1,000 years
I
ago.
know. Now, here's the thing, and we're already getting quite far away from the point here. Could this prehistoric creature, is it a prehistoric creature? It might just be a really big lizard. I don't know. There's definitely touches of the Ray Bradbury there, or the Ray Harryhausen's. Could it have been from prehistoric times, but only been frozen for the last 1,000 years?
Could be. Could this be the lizard equivalent of Captain America?
Wow. Yes, that's obviously what it is.
That's exactly what it is.
He's frozen in ice 1,000 years ago after having to crash his plane. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Let's jump into the story we're doing. It is narrated by its protagonist, a gentleman by the name of Vic Randall, and Vic will set the scene.
My name is Vic Randall. I'm a private eye, and as such I've been in dozens of tight spots where my life hung by a hair. But I never knew the full threat of danger until, by a fantastic quirk of fate, I suddenly became the Atom Detective.
And we have an opening image which takes up 2/3 of the first page of the story, and it's the top of someone's desk. We can see an old-style dial telephone. There's a pistol lying there. There's a pen in a little mounted display. There's an ashtray. It's got a paper clips and a piece of paper, and there's what looks like a folded-up sheet of paper that has what looks like some names and some numbers and a total. Total looks like $27,000 and a few names and some money that might be owed. And holding on to this piece of paper is a tiny, tiny little man in a suit who's looking at the piece of paper and thinking to himself,
This sheet of paper contains the evidence I need to free an innocent man, but I haven't the strength to lift it. What am I going to do?
well, we'll have to find out.
I didn't realize what was in store for me that morning. I visited my friend Ted Trent at State Pen.
Yes, we see Vic in his brown suit, leaning on the countertop as he talks to a friend of his who's incarcerated. His friend is on the other side of a sort of mesh partition. Maybe there's wire through the glass, but it just looks like mesh. His friend is wearing prison fatigues. He doesn't look too happy. And he says, "Lo, befriend me, Vic. He's hated me ever since I flattened him at Shemarko for roughing up an entertainer."
I believe you, Ted. I've always suspected Lober of running the city's numbers racket. I'll watch him till I get the evidence to clear you. So began weeks of unceasing shadowing.
Yeah, great panel. We see Vic lurking in a doorway, very close to a nightclub which is called Eddie's, which has a couple of illustrations on the wall outside of scantily dressed women. The light coming from inside throws a golden glow over the pavement. This is beautifully rendered. A couple of dark figures in suits walking out. One of them looks like John Belushi in the Blues Brothers, it must be said. And as Vic watches these guys emerging, he's thinking,
Lober hasn't made one incriminating move. If I can only get him to admit he framed Ted.
We arrive at the top of page 2.
Lober made a pretense of being a legitimate businessman by operating a wholesale lamp business. Late one night, I'd hardly slipped into his office when I heard voices.
Yes, Vic is obviously doing some digging and investigating. He's crouched behind Lober's desk, and beside him is a small table with a very old-fashioned looking tape recorder on top of it. There's a cable coming down from it, and Vic is plugging this in, and he's thinking,
Lober's coming. Here's my chance, by plugging in this wire recorder. I'll worry later about recovering the cylinder.
We get a close-up of Vic's hand as he writes a note, using the pen that we described being in the mounted stand on the desk. We can read the note, and it says, Lober, you framed Ted Trent, but the truth will soon come out, and you'll replace him in prison. And as he scribbles the note hastily, Vic thinks,
This note should start an interesting conversation. I had just enough time to hide in a clothes closet when...
Yes, we see Lober and a few other men have arrived in the office. Now we get a proper look at Lober here. He's quite short, very, very thick set, wearing a deep blue suit, a red tie, receding swept back dark hair.
Very Bob Hoskins, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. To Lober's left are a couple of suited goons, and to his right are a couple of men who we don't see too clearly, but they're wearing hats. One of these men is saying to Lober, Here are your numbers. Receipts for the week, Lober. $27,000, all itemized and signed by me, handing a piece of paper to Lober. And then we see Vic's thought bubble from inside the wardrobe.
Wow, if I can deliver that note to the police, I can prove my case against Lober.
Lober then notices the short letter that Vic had written moments ago. Startled, Lober picks up and says, Hey, what's this? A note somebody left. They know I framed Trent by planting those numbers receipts in his apartment. We get another thought bubble from Vic.
Nice work, Lober. Keep talking.
And then we're kind of inside the wardrobe with Vic looking out, and Lober is saying to his goons, I just remembered. This note wasn't here a few minutes ago. Whoever left it might still be in the building. Search everywhere. And we see a couple of the goons moving towards the wardrobe door as Vic thinks,
Uh-oh, 2 goons are heading for this closet. I must make a break for it, now!
And he shoves the door open violently, sending a couple of the goons flying. Very helpfully, one of them drops his gun. Lober, still clutching his briefcase, which he had when he came in, says, "It's that private eye, Vic Randall. He heard everything. Get him!"
Lober's men blocked the desk where the incriminating paper lay, so I dashed to the corridor.
Vic makes for the door to the office. One of the goons goes to fire after him, but Lober stops him, putting a hand on his wrist and saying, "Don't shoot. You'll only bring the police. Cover all the exits to trap him."
Down the hallway was a science laboratory, whose door luckily was unlocked.
Yes, we see that Vic is hidden inside this room. We can see the door on the laboratory reads, Scientific Research Associates Incorporated. Room's dark. Vic's making his way through, and there's all sorts of scientific equipment. We can see vials and flasks and test tubes and stuff. Vic is thinking,
nobody here, not even a watchman.
But of course, Vic is blundering in the dark with an almighty crash. He sends some of the equipment flying.
Good grief, I knocked over something. They're sure to have heard it. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash. 100 colours erupted, accompanied by a noise like escaping steam.
Yes, a sss sound effect pervades everything as we see Vic standing amidst a beautiful plume of fumes. Pink and gold and green, all twisting and turning around him. And Vic's thinking,
great guns, what's happening to me? I can't stand up. I can't see. What did I knock over?
We see Vic standing behind this laboratory bench, and he's shrinking. He thinks,
I'm getting smaller and smaller.
You see broken glass and equipment lying on the floor all around him, but also, at the same moment, 2 of Lober's goons have opened the door to Scientific Research Associates Incorporated. One of them says, "He ran into this lab. Snap on the light. He must be hiding inside." Our point of view tracks in closer to Vic for the next panel. We see that he is tiny indeed, standing at the bottom of the laboratory bench. He thinks,
good heavens, I've shrunk to 1/4 of an inch.
And next to him, in a very Land of the Giants prefiguring style, we see the foot of one of the goons as he says, "Lober's on his way. He can't understand why we can't find Randall."
The reason was all too clear, but only to me. Enraged, Lober flung his briefcase to the floor.
Yeah, Lober has arrived in the doorway of the laboratory, throws his leather briefcase that he was carrying earlier down onto the ground. It lands just in front of Vic, and as he does this, Lober says, "Nitwits! A man can't vanish in thin air. Randall must be hiding here somewhere. Ransack the place." Vic thinks,
if it weren't for my freak accident, I'd have been caught. My size has its advantage. I can work unseen.
Vic jumps towards the briefcase, thinking,
Lober never lets his briefcase out of his sight. If I'm aboard, I'll get swift transportation back to his desk, which otherwise would take me hours.
Lober is walking away from Scientific Researchers Associates Incorporated, carrying his briefcase. Vic's narration.
When he left, Lober didn't realize he had a passenger.
Lober looks back to his goons, still standing in the doorway of the lab, and he says, "Turn the joint upside down. As soon as you find Randall, bring him to me." And there's another thought bubble from Vic hidden inside the briefcase.
So far, so good. Lober will carry me to his desk, which will put me within reach of that incriminating scrap of paper. Back in the office, I hastily found a new hiding place.
Yes, we see Vic has snuck out of the briefcase and he's now hiding behind the stand for the sort of fancy fountain pen. Fountain pen which Lober has picked up and is now dipping into an inkwell. Vic surmises,
he's going to write something. He's filling the pen from his desk set. Abruptly, the bottle slipped from his fingers.
Yes, we see that Lober has dropped the ink bottle, which splashes everywhere.
The clumsy fool. I could have been swept over the edge of the desk. But I'd better get out of reach while he's using that blotter.
Yes. All of these actions might well be lost on our younger listeners.
Yes, it's almost lost on me. I can barely remember these things.
I can vaguely remember, like, blotting paper being a thing when I was really, really young. But certainly, you know, in the days of ballpoint pens and Sharpies and such like, it's very difficult to feel a need for an ink bottle.
A fountain pen was something you were given as a fancy present when you were young.
Yeah, which you would probably never use.
Exactly.
Interesting. Anyway.
Muttering angrily, Lober left to find rags and cleaning fluid.
Yes, which leaves Vic on his own, of course.
Here's my chance to get that numbers receipt. But how will I carry it away? It's bigger and heavier than I am.
Yes, we see Vic leaving tiny footprints. We should point this out. Tiny footprints as he walks across the blotting paper to get to the numbers receipt. So that takes us to the top of page 5, where Vic, sitting down, basically we've reached where we were in the opening panel. Vic grabs a hold of the numbers receipt and he's thinking to himself,
I've got an idea where I can hide it from Lober. Laboriously, I folded the paper, stamped it flat, and pushed it towards the edge of the desk.
Yep, great panel, which will probably make its way onto the socials. There must be some proportionate strength going on here.
Oh, he's doing well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We see that Vic has managed to fold the numbers sheet into a smaller square of paper, and he's pushing it towards the edge of the desk, and as he does though, he's thinking,
now it's got to drop near the edge of the rug.
We see that Vic has been successful. The numbers receipt has landed on the floor just where he wants it to. His narration resumes.
To reach the floor safely, I used a rubber band and leaped into space.
Yeah, he's managed to secure a rubber band and loop it round one of the handles of one of the drawers on the desk. And again, we can see his inky footprints where he's walked over to the edge of the desk, and he's grabbed hold of the rubber band and jumped off the edge.
If the band breaks under my weight, I'm done for.
This is dramatic. We see Vic swinging down on the band towards the floor, thinking,
now to land in that handkerchief Lober dropped.
Vic lets go of the rubber band, which rebounds with a twang, and he lands on the handkerchief. Thank goodness for that. He thinks,
made it. All I have to do now is shove that numbers receipt under the rug. I strained every muscle to raise the frayed edge of the rug. Finally, I got my back under it.
Yes, we see Vic with the rug on his shoulders, and he's pulling the numbers receipt towards him.
If the rug slips, I'll smother under it.
Thankfully, that doesn't happen. Vic manages to stash the receipt, and he runs off, thinking,
not bad for a miniature detective. It should be easy to get out of the building now and tell the police where to find that receipt and the wire cylinder.
But then we get a close-up of Vic as thoughts have occurred.
Suddenly, joy turned to despair. Events had moved so fast I hadn't thought of my personal predicament.
Yeah, and Vic thinks to himself,
will I regain my normal size, or have I been permanently reduced? Maybe I'm doomed to remain like this forever.
Holding his head in his hands, Vic leans against the leg of the desk, thinking,
I'm as small as an insect. Even if I escaped larger insects, birds or animals, how could I reach the police? It would take hours to walk a single block. All at once, my thoughts were interrupted.
Yes, as we see a couple of feet walking back into the room, and Vic realises,
it's Lober. I must escape while he's busy cleaning his desk. But as I bolted for the door,
we get a close-up of Lober, and he's a hideous individual, wide eyes, thick heavy-set brows, lined forehead, wide mouth with thick lips, and he's looking down at his desk. He sees the spray of ink, but then he also notices, what are those spots? Why, they're tiny footprints, and the numbers receipt is gone. Lober drops to his knees, looking at the floor. We see more of Vic's footsteps as Lober thinks, here's the trail again. All around the desk, on the handkerchief, on the rug. It's as if a tiny human being walked through the ink and... Hey, what if it's Randall? Maybe that's why we can't find him. Because something happened to him in that laboratory. Very insightful, Mr. Lober.
Mm-hmm.
Vic's narration for the first panel of page 7.
I pulled off my ink-stained shoes and streaked for the wall shadows.
And as Vic runs away from his last hiding place, we see Lober leaning out into the hallway and shouting, Tony, Frisco, I know where Randall is. He's in the hall, but he's as big as an insect. Come here, quick. Vic thinks,
my ruse worked. I made it seem as if I went into the corridor. While they search the halls, I'll leave by the window.
Of course, because we can see if we look closely that the footprints that Lober has followed have taken him to the doorway. So that's obviously where Vic has stashed his shoes. Very, very thoughtful.
Using a thread from the frayed rug, I lassoed a nail on the low window ledge and...
Oh, well done. There's a huge narrative leap between those panels. Well done, Vic. That's very impressive. Vic, indeed, lassoes the nail, manages to climb up onto the window ledge, and we see hanging down a sort of, we'd maybe call it a blind. You can see the little cord hanging from it. Vic thinks,
now when I tug on that shade, it should roll up, taking me to the top.
Technically, because Vic is having to use the shade here, this also invokes the legacy of that classic Golden Age Starman and Flash villain.
It certainly does, and indeed Vigilante villain.
Yes, of course.
Uh-huh.
So there you go, listeners, 2 for the price of 1. The atom and the shade in this story.
Minutes later.
Yep, Vic has managed to take him that long to climb up onto the window ledge, and he pulls the cord for the shade, which rolls up, and with a he goes flying up into the air. Top of the window is open. Vic thinks,
I'll swing outside. Going down should be easier.
This is great. Vic, still hanging onto the cord at the bottom of the shade, launches himself out the window, and then with a whoosh, the shade drops down again, and Vic lands on the outside of the windowsill. Very, very clever. He thinks,
if I can climb down the fire escape undetected, I've got it made.
Yes, we see very helpfully there's a fire escape that leads right up to the windowsill.
But as I descended inch by inch,
Lober and his pals return to the office, and they see what's been going on while they've been away. Lober points and says, look at the shade outside the window. He's going down the fire escape. That's why we couldn't find him. He sent us on a wild goose chase. After him.
By the time I reached the alley...
Yep. Vic, incredibly, has made it down from the top of the building, down the fire escape, to the ground below, before 3 of Lober's goons, who followed him down. 2 of them on their hands and knees, scraping about on the floor to see if they can find him. One of the other goons stands at the back saying, Lober must be cracking, saying Randall's now as big as a bug. And in the foreground of the panel, we see Vic standing next to a dustbin. We've not had a dustbin in an alleyway for a very long time.
Nope, take a drink.
Take a drink. Vic's thoughts.
They'll either catch me or accidentally crush me. Ah, there's a hole in this ash can. I'll be safe in that.
There's a hole in this ash can, dear Liza, yes. So Vic runs into the crack and...
I'd scarcely crawled into the empty refuse can when I began to tremble.
Yes, we hear the sound effect, and there's a vague hint of whirling purple and orange gas and shapes. As Vic clasps his hands to his head and thinks,
Great guns, it's happening again. Colours erupting around me, a hissing sound. But instead of being reduced, this time I was restored to normal size. I popped up like a jack-in-the-box.
Yes, essentially we're looking over the shoulders of the bad guys here, and this panel is beautifully rendered, as the one in the green suit with the orange hair who spoke a moment ago points as Vic seemingly appears out of nowhere. The goon says, I told you Lober was cracking. There's Randall, as big as life. He was hiding in that can. Vic thinks,
whatever shrunk me to atom size must have worn off. I'm myself again.
And then he says out loud,
and this proves it. I can handle a gang like you.
And Vic starts swinging his fists. 2 of the goons go down straight away. The guy in the red with the hat goes down. The guy in the green suit that just spoke, he's on his back already. As Vic punches out the last of the goons, who yells, Ow! Yeah, we can't get near him. He's too much for us.
After the police took over, and I'd recovered the evidence against Lober.
Yes. See, extreme close-up of Vic on the right-hand side of the panel. He's talking to, obviously, a police officer wearing a hat and a very natty, spotty bow tie. In the background, we see Lober and one of his goons, and it looks like they've been handcuffed and being led off by an officer. The officer, who to my eyes looks like a cross between David McCallum and Robert Vaughn.
Can see that.
Yep.
He is a man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yes. He's holding a piece of paper in his hand and he's saying to Vic, Okay, your pal Ted's been cleared, but what about the tiny footprints and making Lober think you were so tiny? And Vic smiles and says,
Forget it, Lieutenant. We can overlook those small details.
And a caption reads,
The end.
To quickly cover the narrative leap between the last 2 panels there, Vic must have gone back in, got the numbers receipt, taken to the police, who would have looked at it and worked out whatever it is that his pal Ted wasn't involved, and this very soulful-looking lieutenant is obviously reasonable and takes it all on board. What about the tiny footprints? So they must have seen the tiny footprints and all that sort of stuff lying around, and Lober's obviously questioning himself in that final panel. That's a little bit of a rushed ending. Another 1 or 2 panels there might have made that smooth, but that does not detract from the fact that was a brilliant story.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. Yeah, that's, if we didn't have that Tootsie Roll pop advert at the bottom of the page, then, an extra couple of panels sort of rounded that out beautifully. But it was, a wonderful story. Now, what's interesting about this story, folks, is that it predates the introduction of Ray Palmer, the Atom.
Yes, the Ray Palmer, the Silver Age Atom, who we're all very familiar with from his red and blue outfit and stuff. The scientist turned superhero. So when was Ray's first published appearance?
Ray first appeared in Showcase issue 34, which came out on the 27th of July 1961.
Wow. So basically 2 years after this.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And Al Pratt hadn't been seen since All-Star Comics 57, which was in 1950, December 1950.
Yeah. Thing to remember, folks, is everyone always talks about the JSA running to 1951, but that's basically the cover date of issue 57. Yeah. And the final issue was published at the tail end of the previous year. So between Al Pratt and Ray Palmer, DC published another story with a crime fighter of small stature.
A mighty mate, so to speak.
Who evoked the name of the Atom. I think
Certainly
that's fantastic. I want to look back at this. I mean, do we know who drew this?
It's Bill Ely, or Eli, E-L-Y is the name. John William Ely.
It's not a name I know, to be honest, but there's some beautiful stuff in here. Like, as I said in page 1, the moody lighting, sort of aided by the very subtle colouring, as Vic watches Lober and his pals leaving eddies. And then the moody shadows as Vic makes his escape and hides in the laboratory.
Yeah.
The very complementary colouring for all the size-changing sequences. It's gorgeous. Even the brief couple of pages in the alleyway towards the end, it's lovely. It's kind of got a feel of a Twilight Zone story.
Yeah, it's more Twilight Zone than it is Land of the Giants, to be honest.
I mean, it's not really. It's obviously we're jesting when we say that he should really be counted as a member of the Atom pantheon, but it's definitely more of a sort of sci-fi crime story than a superhero epic. But it's very satisfying, of course. The involvement of the Shade is hilarious. We're just kidding, folks.
Yes,
we know.
of course.
We're just playing.
I mean, the shrinking man is a sci-fi trope that's been used quite a lot. Obviously,
Richard Matheson's famous novel.
Yes, and it's been used most famously probably in the Land of the Giants TV series. There's also the excellent episode of the Avengers, Mission Highly Improbable.
That's right.
Which is one of my favourites, which is fantastic.
Francis Matthews in that as well, is it something?
I think he was,
Interesting. It's a fun one to start with because his origin, if we want to call it that, obviously strongly evokes the G. Garrick Flash.
Yes, it certainly does.
Accident in a laboratory.
Inhaling fumes, etc.
That's quite interesting.
This is quite a stepping stone from a JSA to a JLA.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
There's familiar elements to some of it, certainly. It's perfectly timed, though, that just as he's in danger of being caught or being stepped on, as he says, that the gas wears off and Vic changes back and he's still got enough of his gumption and his awareness to then just straight away knock out the three bad guys. I mean, Vic could have come back. I would have read a few more stories with Vic. Maybe he could have, found a magic ring or taken a pill by accident that made his strength really heightened for an hour.
Wow. Or found some golden technological wonder that enabled him to fly.
Yes. I think when you and I write our DC comic, we'll do a regular series that features this guy, Vic Randall, and his...
Vic Randall, the one-man JSA.
Yes, and his scrapes.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, maybe maybe he drinks something by mistake, which gives him super speed. I don't know. But it's because obviously Dollman is a character we've met on the podcast before.
And we'll meet again very
shortly.
We'll
meet again very soon indeed. And Ray Palmer's Atom is much closer to Dollman than he is to Al Pratt.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And this, as you said, a sort of stepping stone, a sort of link between the two different versions of the Atom. Obviously, we will end up doing a few more Dollman stories in the run of the podcast, and I hope we do get to do one where we actually see him shrinking at one point. That would be fun.
As opposed to just appearing.
Yeah, I believe in the ones we've done so far, we haven't had that. But no, this was a really, really enjoyable, really, fun little story. I was delighted when we sort of spotted it and was like, oh, wait a minute, this looks good. Because all the House of Mystery stuff from this era is just so enjoyable. The stuff in here and Strange Adventures and Mystery in Space and My Greatest Adventure and all that sort of stuff. I would hope that this is the sort of stuff that DC's finest gets to.
Well, we're certainly getting some Strange Adventures, so we'll see.
So we're going to be some fine reading in there. So yes, so listeners, there we have it. Our first slight play on the legacy of the JSA, the Atom Detective.
Moving around the table of the JSA, the next JSAer sitting to the Atom's left is Wesley Dodds, the Sandman.
Yes! Oh, this is going to be fun. Or is it? We've talked about the Sandman quite extensively in the past in the podcast. And we've done the episodes on, obviously, the Jack Kirby series from the 70s. Issue 6 will be along before you know it. And obviously, we talked a little bit more about him when we did the JSA story that featured his sidekick, Sandy the Golden Boy, being turned into a monster, which we did roughly around about this time last year with the help of a few pals. So what have we found for the Sandman? There were a couple of contenders for this, actually, weren't there?
Most certainly were, yes.
And we may do one of the other ones at some point in the future. We'd actually even asked a couple of people about doing voices for this other version before. Peter discovered this one lunchtime.
Certainly did,
yes. That was a very memorable day. So, to evoke the spirit and the legacy of the Sandman in this special JSApril episode, we're going to bring you a story from Comic Cavalcade, issue 45, published on the 27th of April 1951. This is obviously after Comic Cavalcade has become a Funny Animals book, which happened, I think, in 1948. Who are we going to be meeting in this little segment then, Peter?
Well, I'll describe the cover and this might give you a clue. We have 76 big pages, Comic Cavalcade at the top. And poking their heads out from behind the Comic Cavalcade logo are two characters. On the left, we have the fox, and on the right, we have the crow. Featuring the fox and the crow, the dodo and the frog, and Nutsy Squirrel.
Yes, listeners, we're doing a story where Nutsy the Squirrel teams up with the Golden Age Sandman to take out a former boxer who's going around mutilating young... That's not true. That's the issue of Sandman Mystery Theatre that you never knew you wanted.
But we write our DC comic.
Oh, no. Yeah. Wow. That's to be fair, that's the only thing missing from Sandman Mystery Theatre is...
It's a funny animal story.
It's talking funny animals. Anyway.
Yes, the cover, we have lots of these characters all lined up to give an apple to the teacher. The teacher is the fox, And the Crow is painting... What is he painting?
It's a bomb.
It's a bomb! He's painting a bomb to look like an apple. He's got his stogie in his mouth and he's looking mischievous. Oh, that Crow.
So, listeners, we are going to be doing the Fox and Crow story from issue 45 of Comic Cavalcade. A quick Fox and Crow history lesson. Of course, they're, as a word I always struggle with, anthropomorphic animals created by someone called Frank Tashlin. And they first appeared in cinema cartoons released by Screen Gems through Columbia. That's quite interesting. They made the jump to DC Comics with some other licensed characters when they first appeared in a comic entitled Real Screen Funnies, which became Real Screen Comics for the bulk of its run, but ended up being called Screen Cartoons for the last 9 or 10 issues of its run. Fox and the Crow also appeared in Comic Cavalcade, which, as we all know, was an anthology book that used to star Green Lantern, Flash and Wonder Woman, but was morphed into a funny animal book in 1948. And the Fox and Crow got their own series as well, which ran from December 1951 all the way up to 1968, when they were booted out their own book, and for the last few issues, Stanley and His Monster. Headline.
Yay.
I've got at least one issue of Stanley's Monster, and now that I think about it, I might have an issue of Fox and the Crow. I'll have to have a rummage about and have a look and see.
Is this the first mention of Stanley and His Monster on the podcast?
It could well be.
I think it is.
Do you remember when Kevin Smith used them in Green Arrow and people started losing their minds?
Yes.
It was great.
It was fantastic. I loved it.
I remember that was quite soon after I joined the DC message boards when that was published. One of my first posts was like, Stanley and His Monster? Very, very exciting. So the Fox and the Crow, yeah. It's probably fair to say that we over here in the UK, or at least Peter and I in Glasgow, aren't as familiar with them as, say, we are with maybe, you know, the Looney Tunes characters or Tom and Jerry.
No, definitely not. I don't think it's something we got over here at all.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised to learn that they had started off in cinematic cartoons. I just thought they were DC Comics creations. So you live and you learn. Very, very interesting. So, listeners, how have we managed to link the Fox and the Crow to the noirish or out there escapades of Wesley Dodds the Sandman?
There's only one way to find out, and let's jump into the story.
So, Comic Cavalcade issue 45, cover dated June and July 1951. Our opening image, we get the Fox and the Crow logo at the top, and we see the fox sort of walking along, looking very unhappy, looking quite sad, looking quite tired, a little spiral effect coiling above his head. We see the crow leaning out of the tree where he presumably lives. He spots the fox walking past him. They're quite antagonistic towards each other. That's the sort of the conceit. And the crow sees Fox moping along and he says, "Hey, I wonder why Foxy's walking like that. Uh-oh, I bet he's lost something and he's looking for it." And the crow bursts into action with he bursts out of his front door saying, "Well, find us keepers, I'm gonna look too." He flies gently ahead of the fox, saying, "What'd you lose, Foxy? $10? $5? A diamond stick pin? Whatever it is, remember, find us keepers. That's the rule." And poor Fauntleroy Fox says,
"Crow, if you found what I lost, it wouldn't do you any good because you already have it."
"What'd he say? What'd he say?" says the crow, puffing on his stogie. Fox leaves the panel. Crow walks after him, grabs his tail, saying, "Not so fast, Fuzzface. Come back here and explain that last remark."
"It's very simple, Crow. What I've lost is the ability to sleep. I haven't closed my eyes for weeks, and even the doctor can't help me."
"But what's the idea of walking all bent like that?"
"Because I haven't the strength to stand up straight. I'd give anything in the world to sleep again. I can't understand what's caused it all."
With that, Fox takes his leave, walking into his house. Crow stands watching him go, thinking, "What a revolting development this is."
And we'll come back to that.
Yes. He walks off, deep in thought, saying out loud, "I strain my two little shoe-button eyes staring under every blade of grass in the hopes of finding the U.S. Mint or something, and it turns out Foxy ain't lost nothing at all." You see the crow marching back to his home, saying, "So there went a golden opportunity to make money off that fox. Yous can't get rich off of somebody forgetting how to sleep. No, sir. Yous..." "Bluey!" he yells as his eyes pop out in sockets and his hat flies off and he leaps up into the air. His eyes are wide and staring as he's saying, "Crowsy, you dope, you! This is a chance to make millions. Didn't Foxy say he'd give anything to sleep again and that he didn't know what caused him not to be able to sleep in the first place?" Crow rushes off, seeing dollar signs floating in the air in front of him. "Well, I'm gonna tell him I know why he can't sleep, and if he wants to snooze again, it'll cost him." Crow bursts into the fox's house, yelling, "Foxy! Foxy! Good news! I can help yous, 'cause I know why you can't sleep."
"Oh, Crow, how wonderful! Tell me, quick!"
"Well, first, the reason people sleep is because a fella named Morpheus puts him to sleep. And at the present time, he's mad at yous and won't let yous catch 40 winks.
Now listen, Crow. That's not true. A person called Morpheus does not make people sleep.
Crow thinks to himself, oh no, Foxy's not going for the Morpheus gag. He must be getting smart. Then he says, okay, wise guy, so who does put us to sleep? And Fox is standing at this point with his back to the Crow, arms folded, nose in the air, feeling very superior as he says,
The Sandman.
Crow flies up into the air, leaning into Fox's face saying, "Ya bird brain, there's no such person as the Sandman. That's just a fairy story."
Oh.
Says Fox, who takes a seat in the next panel. We see that Crow has produced a book entitled Greek and Roman Mythology, and he's reading from it now saying, "Now that that's settled, I'll prove to you that Morpheus is the fella that puts us to sleep. It says so right here that the old Greeks and Romans even knew him. See?"
My, so it does. Why, there's his name even. Morpheus. Well.
Fox leans back in the next panel, and he bursts into tears, yelling,
Why doesn't he let me sleep? What's he mad at me for? I don't even know him.
"Relax, Foxy. That's where I come in. Morpheus is a very personal friend of mine." Fox reaches forward, grabbing Crow excitedly, and says,
He is, Crow? You mean you'll speak to him about putting me to sleep again?
"I'll do better than that, Foxy. I'll send him over here. If you treat him right, show him you are a nice guy, maybe he won't be mad anymore."
Oh, I will, Crow, I will. Hurry, I'll show Morpheus that I'm a real peachy fella.
And with a zoom, Crow flies out of Fox's house, saying, "Wow, it's white. I made that dopey Fox believe there really is a fella named Morpheus."
Seconds later.
Back at Crow's house, we see that he's opened up a big box which has written on it, "Fox chiseling costumes for all occasions, C. Crow." The C, of course, stands for Crawford, if you didn't know, folks. And we see Crawford Crow rifling about in this massive box, and he's saying, "Hey, this is a problem. No Morpheus costume. Hey, maybe I can use this dog catcher suit without the badge." There is a slow dissolve.
So, later still.
Back at Fox's house, he looks exhausted, the poor soul, standing rubbing his hands as he greets a new arrival who wears a long blue coat, long sleeves. He wears a large, wide-brimmed hat with a black band. He has goggles on his face and a stogie in the mouth of his beak. And it must be said, this silhouette, the shape of the goggles and the hat and the beak and the stogie does evoke the Golden Age Sandman terribly much. Interesting. Poor old, sleepy old Foxy rubs his hands, greets the new arrival saying,
Come in, come in. You must be Mr. Morpheus.
"You are expecting maybe Superman?"
I don't know what I did to offend you, Mr. Morpheus, but I apologize for it. What can I do to prove I'm worthy of sleeping again?
And Mr. Morpheus is now relaxing in Foxy's big green chair, and he replies, "Well, first you might give me something to eat. I'll take roast beef, gravy, French fries, and a side of corn, and a $10 bill." The Fox rushes back in, bearing a plate, ladled high, as he says,
Here you are, sir. Here's all the food you ordered, but why do you want the $10 bill?
"To look at!" exclaims Mr. Morpheus, swirling his head round quickly.
To look at?
Says a very tired-looking Fox as Morpheus is now seated at a table with a large spoon, the food in front of him, and holding up the $10 bill, he says, "Yeah, I like to read while I'm eating." The next panel, he's polished off the repast and he says, "Not bad. Maybe you ain't such a bad guy after all, but I'm still not convinced."
You aren't?
Nope. Hey, Mr. Morpheus, and we can see that it's the Crow, has spotted something in the corner. He rushes over saying, "Well, looky what we have here. A safe. I love safes, especially ones with money in them. Does this one have money?"
Well, yes.
"Wonderful. My favourite kind of safe. No doubt you want to give it to me, and I accept. I love safes."
But I can't give it to you, Mr. Morpheus. It contains every cent I own.
Mr. Morpheus walks off looking angry, saying, "Oh, a safe miser, huh? There's one kind of guy I never puts to sleep, and that's a safe hoarder. Goodbye." Fox rushes over, blocking the door so that Mr. Morpheus, aka the Crow, can get out. Fox says,
Wait, I was only kidding. I want you to have my safe. Really, I do.
"Okay, I'll take it." We see the Crow, aka Morpheus, carrying the safe along as Foxy says,
Thank you so much for accepting my safe, Mr. Morpheus. Now, will you put me to sleep, huh? Will you put me to sleep, please?
"I'll think it over." Fox's expression changes. He looks very angry as he says ferociously,
Now, listen, Morpheus. I've been a good guy. I've been nice to you. And if you don't put me to sleep, I'll think you're an imposter.
"Stop! Do yous know to whom yous are talking to whom?" Fox drops to his knees, crying now, lifting his hands in supplication as he says,
I'm sorry, Mr. Morpheus, but can't you give me some little proof? Can't you put me to sleep just a little?
Mr. Morpheus folds his arms and says, "Well, okay. Just to prove I'm me, I'll give yous a short nap. But that's all,"
Oh, thank you, thank you. Shall I lie down first?
says Fox, jumping up and down with delight as Morpheus waves a hand and says, "No, that won't be necessary. Just toying around." So Fox turns around. We see that Morpheus, aka the Crow, stepped onto a very handy stool, produced a large wooden mallet, which he brings down hard on the head of the Fox with a bonk. "That time," says Morpheus. Fox is down on the ground, huge bump appearing in his head, the poor soul, as Morpheus, aka the Crow, skips away saying, "Now, while Fox is dreaming of a white Christmas or something, I might as well have another little snack to, hey." And we see that Fox is sort of kind of dreaming. We can see him imagining a little Tweety bird, as you often used to see in cartoons. If someone gets knocked on the head, the little birds flying around their head. I'm miming that for the benefit of our YouTube viewers. And Morpheus addresses the little bird, saying, "Cut that out! Quit making so much noise. You'll wake him up before I've had me lunch." And we see the little bird looking very panicked. And again, the bump on the Fox's head is throbbing. There's a slow dissolve. And we see Morpheus perched on a shelf in an empty fridge. The door's wide open. There are empty plates and a bone lying on the ground. Morpheus obviously cleaned it out. In the next panel, Fox is waking up. We hear his foggy voice saying,
Where am I?
And as the Crow, aka Morpheus, is chewing on what looks like a chicken leg or something, he exclaims, "Uh-oh, Fox is awake. Now that I've proved I can put him to sleep, I'll really clean up." He walks through to the room. We see Fox recovering on the ground as Morpheus says, "Finally woke up, huh? Guess I proved that I'm really Morpheus, huh?"
Yes, but I can tell you're still mad at me. It hurt when you put me to sleep.
"Oh, that? Well, I am still kind of peeved at yous. I'm afraid you'll have to be an awful lot nicer to me than yous have been if you wanted to sleep without it hurting."
Oh, I will. Just give me the chance,
says the Fox, with his bump in his head still throbbing and stars still flying around as he struggles to get to his feet. There is a slow dissolve.
2 hours later.
Mr. Morpheus is sat in the big chair again. Fox runs in, holding a couple of boxes, one labelled candy, one labelled cigars. Fox says,
Look, here are some more things you said you liked, Mr. Morpheus.
"Just put 'em in the corner with the rest of me loot. By the way, did I mention that I like cars and diamonds?" And at this point, there is a new arrival. It's an elderly-looking, anthropomorphic white dog, a bit of a terrier, very smartly dressed, little hat on, glasses. He's carrying, clearly, a medicine bag. And as he arrives on the scene, he says,
Mr. Fox, it's me, Dr. Jones. I dropped by to give you these sleeping tablets. I believe they'll help you.
To which Fox says,
Hello, Doctor. That's nice of you, but I don't need them. Mr. Morpheus, the man who puts people to sleep, is here, and he's promised...
"Uh-oh," says Morpheus, aka the Crow, because he realises he's been rumbled.
Morpheus? Why, there's no such person. True, the ancient civilizations had a mythological god who was supposed to be the god of sleep, but he wasn't real.
To which Fox exclaims,
He wasn't? I mean, he isn't?
And at this point Morpheus has leapt to his feet and he rushes off, saying, "Oh, sorry I can't stay to chat, but I gotta see my Aunt Oima in Boima." Fox catches Morpheus, grabbing him from behind by the neck and saying,
Your Aunt Irma can wait. I want to check something.
And with that, with the bump on his head still visible, the Fox whips off the big hat and the goggles that Morpheus was wearing.
Just as I thought! The Crow!
There's a slow dissolve. It is night time. We see that the tree that the Crow lives in is very near Fox's house. And visible through his bedroom window, we see the Fox tucked up in bed comfortably, and he's saying,
I know now why I couldn't sleep. It was because I could never get even with that Crow for his chiseling. But now, I can sleep like a baby.
And in the foreground, leaning on the window of his bedroom, with what looks like a bandage wrapped round his beak and a massive bump on his head and stars floating in the air above him, is a very pained-looking Crow who says, "That Fox bruised me so much I can't lie down to sleep. I wonder if I'll ever loin." And the caption reads,
The end.
Well then,
That was fantastic. Morpheus.
Morpheus and mentions of the Sandman.
And Superman.
Yep, There you go, listeners.
Wonderful.
Who says we don't research?
So that's another twofer, another mention of Superman there.
Yep. Very, very interesting. I mean, we all know what's going on with the creator of the series that ended up at Vertigo, the 80s Sandman series, so we're not going to praise him or labour him too much, but it's interesting to sort of speculate on what if he'd incorporated the Fox and the Crow into his continuity as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there might have been rights issues there, but it's fascinating.
It's also interesting to think that if we take into account the chronology and the timeline of the Neil Gaiman Sandman, the conceit established in there is that the reason Wesley Dodds goes out and puts on a gas mask and does what he does is because this is when Morpheus is imprisoned.
Yes.
It's probably safe to say that if this comic was published in 1951, this falls into the period when Morpheus was imprisoned.
Yes,
so is it
definitely
entirely possible that Morpheus had some kind of influence on the Crow and made him
Who knows?
dress up like this? Because that one panel where, the Crow disguised as Morpheus arrives, as I said, with the big hat and the goggles and his beak and the stoogie sticking out, that looks hella like Wesley Dodds.
Yes, it certainly does.
I'm assuming it's a coincidence.
Yeah, it may well be. I mean, Wesley Dodds last appeared in his superhero costume as opposed to the gas mask version before this on the 28th of December 1945 in an Adventure Comics story from issue 102, The Dream of Peter Green. But of course, he'd disposed of the gas mask costume a long time before.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, our pal Ross, who's helped us out in the past, will help us again in the future, and is doing his Opal City Confidential run on his podcast. He's well into the Wesley and the Purple and Yellow, the Golden Age Starman stories that he's covering. And I think Ross has just done one from early 1943. So yes, I mean the gas mask and the suit is long gone.
Yes, without a doubt.
I think it's probably an unintentional throw, but then again, it might not be. I mean, look at the first panel of page 7 again with the stoogie sticking out of Crow's mouth and the big hat and the long coat. I mean, could be a callback. It's fun to speculate that it's deliberate. Yeah. And it was a very fun little story. It makes me want to read lots more Fox and Crow, quite frankly.
Yes. I mean, the funny animal stories are just that. They're fun. They're just there purely to entertain. And DC kind of lumps all the funny animal stuff together into Earthsea later on.
Right.
Fox and Crow, I don't think I mentioned, obviously, because they're licensed characters. But it's interesting. The mention of Superman's interesting. Do you think Superman exists as comics? Or in some way, shape, or form in this world, in this cartoon world? Yeah, I mean, that's the obvious question, but in fact, he looks nothing like Superman. So it's even, that's just which makes that reference even more amusing. Yes. There's a fair bit to unpack and all that. I mean, it's interesting that, obviously, the relationship between Fox and Crow is horrendous. Yes. The Crow does not come out of this particularly well. Neither does the Fox at the end when he beats the Crow up. Yeah, but you can kind of understand his motivation. It's turnabout as fair play, I suppose. This makes me want to do some more deep digging and try to go through every single funny animal comic that DC published in this era and see if there's any other references to anyone else that could possibly be. Consider that a DC superhero legacy aspect. But it is fascinating because, this clear, as you said at the top, clear references to the Sandman and the use of Morpheus obviously evokes later developments for that character or for the legacy of that character. It certainly does. And obviously, character legacy is what we're all about at this podcast. Without a doubt. And speaking of legacy, I was intrigued when the Crow had the thought bubble, what a revolting development this is. Because that catchphrase to us comic fans is completely associated with Bashful Benji Grimm, the Thing himself of the Fantastic Four. Of course. But of course, this is way before Fantastic Four #1. Yes, about 10 years before. Exactly. 10 years plus, yeah. So I did a bit of digging, because I thought, well, if that didn't originate from Bashful Benji, right, where did it come from? And I thought, they can't possibly have got it from this comic, and I was correct. They didn't get it from this comic. It actually was one of the catchphrases of a character called Chester Riley, from a radio show called The Life of Riley. Oh, interesting. It's played by William Bendix, and that started in 1941. That's very interesting, because I would immediately think The Life of Riley is, it's a well-used phrase to sort of mean like having an easy time of it, I suppose, isn't it? And I would think of the song by the Lightning Seeds. Yes. Maybe if this was an episode of Power 3, we could play out with that song. It was a kind of an ironic title, because he was kind of a put-upon character. Right. So he certainly didn't live The Life of Riley, but... Interesting. Yes. See, all this cultural knowledge that we're all gaining, listeners. I know, it's fantastic. It's not just multiverses and how many different Dr. Fates there's been.
it's fascinating. This has really sort of piqued my interest. I really would love to be able to read some more Fox and Crows, so I'll maybe have to do some digging around, see what I can find. And maybe have to see if any were reprinted in any of the funny stuff digests. Probably not, but I've got a niggling feeling. I know that I've got at least one issue of Stanley's Monster. I've got a niggling feeling I might have a Fox and Crow as well, so I'll have to have a look and see what I can find, and maybe that'll be enough to sate my appetite. But this was very, very enjoyable. Great fun to read, great fun to enact, as it were. Fast-paced sort of screwball, sort of funny animal comedy. You can't whack it.
Yes, I've got one issue, I'm sure, of Fox and Crow. Right. I'll try and dig that out for some bonus content for this week, listeners.
That'll do.
And we'll post that as well. But yes, the funny animal stories, people kind of like look down upon them, poo-poo them, but you know what? Compared to other Golden Age comics, they're cheap and they're highly entertaining. Yeah. And also, in it, you get the house adverts for everything else that was happening. So it's phenomenal. Yeah,
entertaining is the word. This is great fun. I mean, as we said at the top, this book their own book ran a long time. They were featured in 3 comics at once simultaneously. So there was a market for this sort of stuff. And obviously tastes have shifted, but, I'm not saying bring back funny animals as a way to fix, the failure of comics as a mass entertainment sort of medium. They wouldn't have sold if they weren't doing something right. And obviously they sold because to appear in 3 comics simultaneously, it took a long time for a lot of other characters to reach that. So
it was aimed at a demographic and they bought it. They loved it. It was fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, huge entertainment, and so many people grew up with these. And as we said at the beginning of this, we had no knowledge of the cartoon at all going in.
Yep.
And it's just part of our research that we discovered all this backstory. So we are discovering at the same time you are, listeners.
Amazing.
Great stuff.
So that takes 2 off. The Atom and now the Sandman.
And the next hero sitting at the table to the Sandman's left is, of course, the Spectre.
Yes, we've covered the Spectre in great depth on the Earth 2 podcast. We did his revival stories in the 60s and Showcase. We did his 60s ongoing series. And, of course, occasional co-host and guest contributor Steve Higgins and I did the bulk of his Adventure Comics stuff together last year. Mm-hmm. He popped up very recently, of course, in the JSA team-up from 1975, and he's not going to have much more to do before Crisis on Infinite Earths, it must be said.
No, he popped up recently talking to his boss, God, as played by Elliot S. Magan.
And that's the first time we recorded since I'd heard that. And, I think as I think I might have said, Chuck and I had spoken DMs and Chuck had said, Magan's on Facebook. And I was like, oh, can you imagine? And we all imagined. So tell us correctly then, Peter, how did it come around that Elliot ended up taking part in JLA 124?
I messaged him and asked him, and a bit of to and fro, and I sent him a link to the one where we played Carrie Bates before.
Right.
So he knew the sort of thing that we did and how we did it. And he was quite happy, obviously, at my Carrie Bates impersonation.
Right.
I hope who's happy at your Elliot Magan impersonation.
Can you imagine listening to that?
I'm imagining it right now.
Yeah.
So, yes, thank you again, Mr. Magan. You're an absolute gentleman.
Elliot's new book, LexCorp, is available from the internet shopping place. It's named after a river. So
it's loads of places it's available.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you'll find it online, yes.
The main link we'd seen was that one. So we've shared links to buy it on our socials a couple of times. It'd be great if you could support Elliot, because he was very keen to give it. We got the guy who blooming co-wrote the story to do a voice in it. That's unquantifiable. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Everyone else that does a podcast or something. I mean, honestly, will we be able to repeat such a thing? Who knows?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
So, not for this particular story.
No, not for this episode at least. Or next week's. We don't have anything planned, I promise. We're not lying. But yeah, definitely shout out to Chuck again for alerting us to the fact that, as he put it, Magan's on Facebook. And it's absolutely hilarious. And Chuck has recently revived his Boxing Arrow podcast with a twist, so make sure you check that out and support it. But anyway, the Spectre.
Yes.
There was another Spectre, of course. We did a Johnny Quick story a few years ago, just before we started the Silver Age series, where Johnny Quick met a sharp-dressed bad guy who was called the Spectre. So if you go back probably to 2021, you'll probably find that episode.
He had his own magic formula, similar to Johnny's, but didn't give him super speed. No.
That's right. That was a fun story to do. But this one, it's one of these ones where, it's not like there's a new version of the avenging sort of spirit of God or anything, but it's an interesting story.
It's a use of the name, but also a bit more thematic. To be honest, we had about a dozen contenders for this one, but we decided to go for this because it also involves another Golden Age hero.
Yes. So without any further ado, Peter's going to describe to us the cover of issue 42 of
Dollman, the world's mightiest might. We're in a dark forest at night, and it's very eerily lit. There is a giant creature traipsing through the forest. Oh, he's hideous. You know what? He looks a bit like Oddbod from Carry On Screaming.
Yeah, like a cross between Oddbod the Hulk and Solomon Grundy.
Yes, very good way to put it.
Thank you.
A lot of green tinging to him. Got some rags hanging off him. Very hairy body. Big beard. He's got some unkempt hair. Claws kind of at the end of his fingers. Very pointy fingernaily claws.
Talons almost.
Big hairy feet. He is a beast.
Yes.
And at the front of the cover, looking aghast, is Dollman, who's recoiling at this hideous sight lumbering towards him. The whole thing's lit by a gas lamp in front of him. It's very cool. Very moody.
You get the suggestion that, to me at least, that Darrell Dane was on a camping trip. And this has happened. It's been interrupted by this
creature coming down upon him. And the caption reads, "The Eerie Tale of the Mind Monster." And in the grand tradition of the Earth 2 podcast, it's got nothing whatsoever to do with the story.
Yes, we're not doing this one.
No. And the good thing is, listeners, this is a public domain comic, so you can read it for free at Comic Book Plus and probably Digital Comic Museum as well.
Yeah, so you'll be able to read along with us and hopefully enjoy it just as much as we do as we jump into the story we are reading. Our opening image, Dollman and Doll Girl. Has she appeared in the show before?
Martha has.
Anyway. A chap, a kind of older looking man, thinning hair, creased foreheads, slightly overweight, in a green suit, is walking across a gantry above a boiling vat of molten steel, being pursued by Dollman and Doll Girl, and there's a weird cloud of steam or smoke, which seems to be almost forming into human form, with arms reaching out towards this man who's recoiling in fear. A caption reads,
"John Brath wanted the steel hardening formula. Wanted it badly enough to kill for it. Murder brought the mighty mites of justice, Dollman and Doll Girl, onto his trail. But even more frightening was the strange vengeance exacted by the Spectre in steel."
Gosh. A little establishing caption gets us into the story properly.
Darrell Dane and a fellow scientist attend a business conference at the office of steel magnate John Brath.
Yes, John Brath, he's the chap we described in the larger image. Smart green suit, smart red tie. Darrell Dane looking phenomenally sharp in a sort of petrol green almost. Looks like it's double-breasted the way he's sitting here, but I love the design. Another red tie. Darrell smoking a pipe.
Yeah.
Mark that down in your jotters. And between them is a thin-faced, older-looking chap wearing a very smart blue suit and orange tie. Kind of sandy-coloured hair, very small round glasses. Who sat between Brath and Darrell. We'll meet him properly in a second. Brath is speaking.
"I've made a handsome offer for your steel hardening formula. I must have it."
Darrell replies, "I'm sorry, Mr. Brath. My colleague Elmer Ronald and I have decided to refuse your offer." Elmer, of course, being the older chap with sandy hair and the small glasses and the blue suit. Elmer chips in with,
"We both feel the formula isn't quite ready for commercial use."
"Yeah, we've decided to continue with our experiments, and not until we've studied all the formula's reactions will it be put on the market."
"Well, if that's your final decision, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. When you're ready to market it, I'll enter another bid."
And with that, Elmer and Darrell stand and take the leave, and we see that it is indeed a double-breasted suit that Darrell is wearing.
When the two scientists depart,
Brath stands at the door of his office and says to himself,
"I've got to have that formula. It's my last chance to save my business from bankruptcy. I can't afford to wait while they continue their silly experiments."
He gets a close-up, cigar in his mouth as he thinks,
"If they won't sell the formula, there are other and cheaper ways to get it. I won't let anything stand in my way."
There's a slow dissolve.
Several days later,
and we see Brath at the wheel of a large car in the company of a couple of goons, guy in a purple suit wearing a green hat, guy in an orange suit wearing a brown hat, and on the pavement in front of them we can see Darrell Dane, Martha Roberts and Elmer Ronald. Brath turns to his two compatriots and says,
"Here they come. Remember your instructions."
And the guy in the orange suit and the brown hat says, "Sure, Mr. Brath, just leave it to us." And the next panel we see the purple-suited goon and the orange-suited goon with pistols drawn, lounging in the doorway of a shop as Elmer, Martha and Darrell walk past. Orange-suit goon says, "No noise, folks, or we might be forced to use these heaters. The lady can go, but you two are coming with us." Darrell exclaims, "Huh?" and turns to his pals and says, "They're trying to kidnap us. Get ready, Martha. I'm going to create a little diversion."
"Check."
"You'll never get us," says Darrell, who suddenly shoves Elmer, who exclaims,
"Huh?"
into the orange-suited goon, knocking his hat off and sending him flying as the goon exclaims, "Ow!"
In almost the same instant, Darrell Dane and Martha Roberts exert their amazing willpower to condense the molecules of their bodies and become Doll Man and Doll Girl.
Yes, and all we see of this is a sort of flash of yellow energy, and suddenly Daryl and Martha are in costume. Martha's costume is kind of the flip of Daryl's. She has a red unitard and a blue cape, whereas Daryl's bodysuit is blue with a red cape. Orange Suit Goon looks around and says, "Hey, where did they disappear to?" And his purple-suited compatriot says,
"They must have ducked into hiding place somewhere."
Springing out of nowhere, it seems, Dollman and Dollgirl, with Dollman leaping up saying, "Looking for someone?" Martha says,
"Maybe we can help you."
"Yow!" exclaims the orange-suited goon. The next panel's amazing. Oh my goodness, the violence. Dollman flies forward and grabs the eyelids of the purple-suited goon and pulls them shut, saying as he does so, "Keep looking with your eyes closed." Exclaims the goon. Frankly, I can't blame him. Next panel, we see Dollgirl exhibiting a perfect uppercut. She knocks out Orange Suit Goon, saying,
"Baby, they went straight up. See anything there?"
She punched him out, sending his head flying back as he goes, "Down on the ground." The next panel, to add insult to injury, Dollgirl stands on Orange Suited Goon's head, saying,
"I don't believe he's seeing anything at all, except stars."
The other chap presumably must be adjusting to going blind, as he just seems to be standing there as Dollman says, "Elmer Ronald's gone. I guess he went to summon the police."
But the Dollman's guess is wrong. At this very moment...
Yes, we see that Elmer is suddenly sat in the car that Brath was in. Brath has moved into the passenger seat and he's pulled a pistol on Elmer. Elmer says,
"John Brath, what do you want with me?" "I didn't plan to become personally involved in this, but when my hired henchman failed me, I had no choice. I want the formula for your steel hardening process. If you know it's good for you, you'll hand it over without an argument."
Elmer is stunned. He says,
"You must be mad." "I'm not mad, merely desperate. Ruin is the only alternative that faces me, and I won't accept that."
We've now driven to Branth's steel plant. Car is parked. Branth is prodding Elmer to walk in front of him. Gun on his back, Elmer has his hands raised.
"Soon?"
We're inside, back in Branth's office. We see just what a portly, unsightly fellow Brandt is poor Elmer, looking very strained, sat at the desk with a pen in his hand and a piece of paper, as Brandt says to him,
"You're being sensible, Ronald. Write down the formula, and I'll let you go."
Elmer thinks,
He can't afford to release me. He knows I'd go straight to the police. Brath intends to get rid of me. Somehow. Now that he's getting the formula, I'm no more use to him.
Yeah, we see Branth lifting the piece of paper that Elmer's just written on, but Elmer gets to his feet, tries to knock Branth off his feet, and Elmer says,
"I've got to escape. It's now or never."
"Oof!" exclaims Branth as Elmer nudges him, and then Branth fires after Elmer as Elmer runs out the door. Elmer thinks,
"My only chance is to reach the steel plant. There's bound to be a watchman on duty."
But it's a bit of a narrative leap. Elmer has obviously tried to make his escape by running across a gantry above the boiling vats where the steel process is going on. Catching up to him, Branth fires. There's a bang! And Elmer is caught with a bullet. He exclaims, and Branth thinks,
"I got him."
And then in the next panel, horribly, Elmer tips over the gantry. And, well, Branth spells it out for us.
"He's falling into the vat of molten steel."
And Branth gets a close-up here where he doesn't look particularly regretful, it must be said. Poor Elmer, oh my goodness. Is this the most horrible death we've had on the show? It could be. Branth gets a close-up as he says,
"Not a single trace remains of his body. Nothing can exist for even a second in that furnace of molten metal. I've won."
There's a slow dissolve.
The following day at police headquarters...
Yes, we see Dollman and Dollgirl standing on the desk of a senior police officer. We can tell he's senior because he's got ribbons round his sleeves. Policeman is saying,
"One of these fellows you captured says that John Brath hired them. It's ridiculous, of course. Why would a prominent businessman stoop to kidnapping?"
Dollman taps his chin and thinks to himself, I can guess the reason why. The next panel. Oh my goodness, I love it. We're outside the police station. And Dollgirl is already astride the back of Elmo, who's a nice big dog. Actually, I don't know the details of the history of Elmo, so we'll have to dig into that, and maybe we'll mention it in the recap at the end of the year episode.
Doll dog.
Yes. Martha, on Elmo's back, is saying,
"Evidently, the police didn't take that crook's confession very seriously."
And as Dollman jumps onto Elmo's back too, he says, "But I do. John Brath was after the steel hardening formula. He may have wanted it badly enough to steal it. In that case, John Brath can explain Elmer Ronald's mysterious disappearance."
"Giddy up, Elmo!"
exclaims Martha as the dog starts running off. There's another slow dissolve.
Meanwhile...
And we see Branth kneeling on the gantry above one of the vats of steel. He seems to have a test tube in his hand and he's pouring something from the test tube into the metal fluid below him. He's thinking,
"This tiny vial of liquid added to the molten metal is what hardens the steel. If it works, I'll be a rich man."
The next panel, he's climbing down from the gantry via a ladder and he's saying,
"The reaction will begin in a few moments. Then I'll know whether... What?
And he stopped, because rushing in on the back of Elmo are Dollman and Dollgirl. Dollman yells, "What was in that vial, Brath? It's the formula, isn't it? You kidnapped Elmer Ronald and forced him to give it to you.
Get away from me!
What have you done with Elmer Ronald? Talk, and it may go easier with you later."
You can't frighten me, Dollman. I know that you can't prove anything.
You're pretty sure of yourself, aren't you? And with that, he leaps off Elmo's back, and with a sock, punches Branth in the face. Branth exclaims, "Ugh!" And he falls back as Dollman follows up, saying, "Grab that vial, doll girl."
I've got it.
Says Dollgirl as she grabs the vial that Brath dropped in the first panel.
But I don't see what possible good...
She hands it to Dollman, who looks at Brath, who's lying on the ground rubbing his face from the pounding that he received. And Dollman says, "If the vial contained a steel hardening formula, we can prove it by chemical tests. That will show whether John Brath really got the formula from Elmer Ronald. In that case, we'll be back, and we'll make sure you tell us what you've done with Ronald," says Dollman, as he and Dollgirl take their leave on Elmo's back.
Later.
Now we see Brath walking up some steps to look down on the vats, which are boiling and bubbling in a fascinating range of colours below him, with steam and smoke coming off. Brath is saying to himself,
Let them prove I have the formula. I can always claim I bought it from Ronald. Not likely he'll ever contradict me.
And Brath laughs to himself in the next panel. We can see a very conspicuous little strain of steam behind him as he says,
That's a good one. I'd like to see anyone bring Elmer Ronald back as a witness against me. They have to find him first.
Like a mist, a ghostly evocation of the dead, a spectral shape slowly rises from the vat of molten steel.
And we see Brath standing in the gantry looking down as a little cloud of steam forming in front of him seems to be taking on a human face. Brath looks appalled. He yells,
What's that?
And he steps back as the steam seems to coil around him. He exclaims,
Elmer Ronald! He's come back to get me! Ah!
From outside, we see Dollman and Dollgirl still making their exit on Elmo, and they've obviously heard the noise. Dollgirl says,
Did you hear that? Someone screamed.
And those are shots, says Dollman, because obviously Brath has his pistol out and he's trying to fire at the steam. Dollman and Dollgirl run back in to see.
It's Brath. He's gone crazy. He's shooting at nothing.
And we see, from their point of view, that up on the gantry, Brath is indeed firing his pistol at a cloud of steam which is hovering in front of him. Let's grab him, yells Dollman. We then cut back up onto the gantry, and the cloud of steam does seem to be coiling around and reaching towards Brath, who is saying,
I killed you once, Elmer Ronald, and I could do it again. Ah!
He fires his gun, and Dollman observes he missed his footing and reaches forward to try and grab a hold of Brath's suit to stop him falling. There's a massive as Dollman failed, and Brath falls out of sight. Dollman left, holding just a fragment of the sleeve of his suit jacket. Too late, says Dollman.
He's gone. No one can save him. He plunged into the vat of molten steel.
Two heroes look down at the vat below them. Dollman says, Perhaps he deserved such a fate. His last words were a confession of murder. I can guess how he killed Elmer Ronald, though no one will ever be able to prove it. That boiling metal destroys all evidence.
Ah, how horrible. But what was he shooting at, Dollman?
At a ghost, conjured up by his killer's conscience. You see, Brath didn't know that the steel hardening formula creates a misty vapour when it's mixed with molten metal.
It does look like a ghost, doesn't it? I can see where John Brath would think it really was. In a way, he was brought to justice by the Spectre in steel.
And things conclude as they walk back down the gantry, and we see the steam boiling off, bubbling molten metal. There's no caption, but that is
the end.
Well, yeah, suppose, yeah, well, there was a Spectre.
Spectre in steel.
The Spectre in steel, the
Yes.
Spectre in me. Coming soon in the next episode, The Ghost and Watson.
Yes, without a doubt.
A very, very effective climax. The baddie falls to his death there. I have a
Yes.
feeling I've seen something like that somewhere before, but I can't off the top of my head think of it. Bad guy making a mistake, thinking he's seen something that he's not, and he falls to his doom. That seems familiar to me. I think I've seen that somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a trope, especially someone seeing like the victim or imagining they're seeing
Yeah.
the victim of someone that they've killed.
Yeah, and let's be honest, there's nothing to say here that it's not the ghost of Elmer Ronald.
Exactly. I think it is.
Because if you look at the first couple of panels on tail end of page 6, start at page 7, it definitely does look like a face, and it definitely does look like the steam and the smoke, or whatever you want to call it, is acting with agency. Like it knows what it's doing.
Without a doubt. Yeah, because it is curling round him. And also, the way it's coming up, it's literally coming up towards him and facing him. It's not
Yeah.
like going randomly about the place. It's aiming for him.
Yeah. And what a horrible way to go for poor Elmer.
For either of them.
I mean, it's just like... Do you remember that public information film with Patches with the kids all getting killed on the farm? Did you ever see that?
Don't remember that one, no.
It's on YouTube, I'll send you it. I'm reminded of that because it's like instant death.
Okay.
Do you remember? Do you ever see the Michael Palin and John Cleese play Secrets about the guy working in the chocolate factory that falls into the chocolate and he gets incorporated into the mix and the world goes nuts for this new meaty flavoured chocolate?
Oh, I see. No.
It becomes this thing about disposing bodies and putting them into the chocolate.
We need Todd Part 2.
It was remade as a movie in the 80s, but for the life of me, I can't remember. Something Pleasures, I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the film.
Okay.
It's always fascinating, as a horrible way to die. Someone flying from a gantry to because you've got no way. You fall into that molten steel, you've got no chance. It's not like Eel O'Brien falling into a vat of, bubbling plastic, or Joker allegedly falling into the chemicals or whatever.
Yep, I was going to use those exact two examples.
Legopolis.
Imagine it had some effect on them. They'd come out with steel powers.
We probably wouldn't have done this story then.
Unless they were called the Spectre in Steel. I call myself the Steel Spectre. I have risen from the grave with my new steel powers.
Unless it was maybe a side effect of the hardening formula. I don't know.
Be.
But it's horrible. I mean, it's like, not by any definition would that be a slow, painful death. At least you would go quickly. One moment of absolute fear as you fell, and then that would be you.
Yes. I'm worried about the health and safety aspect of this factory. There is no one there apart from the owner. Is that part of his monetary troubles? Has he had to lay everyone off because he's in such dire straits? All he can do is hire 2 hoods to help him. 2 very ineffectual hoods, one of whom is now blind.
Yes. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, like Dollman grabbing that guy by the eyes.
That's
you're
horrible.
Right. I mean, because obviously Elmer's hoping he'll find a watchman to sort of assist them, but there's no one there.
No.
As you say, the health and safety, those gantries are very close to the vats. They're open. There's not the fencing should be much higher. There should be a grill along the bottom to stop people slipping through.
You've got big metal hooks hanging down from the ceiling and chains that are all just loose there.
It's a health and safety nightmare. It's a good thing they didn't have any comic long boxes lying around clogging the stairs at the same time, because otherwise I'd have to shift them. And also, I know this is quality rather than Fawcett, but I know that we've observed in the past that some of these Golden Age stories are really quite killy. Yes. In a way that comics just really aren't. By the time you get into the Silver and the Bronze Age, casual, violent, horrible death is a thing.
This is pre-Comics Code Authority here.
Yeah. This is the sort of thing that if I'd been a little boy and had this comic, I would have read those bits 1,000,000 times. It's like when you're a kid and because remember when we were reading the Eagle in the early 80s, there was some really quite, especially in stories like Doomlord and the Collector, there was some really quite nasty stuff in there.
Yeah.
And those were the bits you always read and reread. I remember the guy falling in the pickaxe or the guy eaten by the plant. Do you remember that one in the Collector?
Not offhand.
And all those people just getting slaughtered by Doomlord. And when you're a kid, you want that kind of visceral, nasty. It's not explicit. There's no blood and guts.
No,
but it's really unpleasant and thrilling and exciting. And I'm surprised that I found myself more taken with the violent death than the fact that Dollman had a dog.
Yes. I know nothing about Elmo, I'll be perfectly honest.
Me neither. We'll have to do some digging before the next time Dollman pops up.
Yeah.
But Elmo's obviously very well trained and is a good boy.
Well, Bullet Man and Bullet Girl had Bullet Dog, so...
Did they?
Yes, they did.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
So why not have Elmo? Who knows?
Someone's going to have to write a story, obviously, where Elmo and Bullet Dog and Ace the Bat Hound and Crypto...
And Thor.
Yes,
Manhunter's
Thor. Of course, all team up. I remember one issue of the Tom Peyer Rags Morales Our Man series. I thought they were going to do something with with a dog sidekick, but I think it was just Tyler in another disguise. I seem to remember, but I haven't read that in 25 years. I don't know. Yeah, the Spectre in the Steel.
It's funny that we've kind of bookended this episode with 2 miniature heroes. The Atom Detective and Dollman.
Did you plan that, or is it lucky happy stance?
Slightly, yeah.
Okay, no, that's good.
Well, it's one of the factors that made me decide in this story is the best one to do.
Were there other stories with other Spectres then?
There was a few. There was the Lois Lane story, which was a spectral groom. There was other bits and pieces, but this, because it featured a Golden Age hero, I felt it's most appropriate as well.
Yeah.
But it's quite fun. Also, when you think about it, Dollman is arguably a much more successful hero than the Ray Palmer Atom was as far as publication goes. Because Dollman lasted for years and years. I mean, this is issue 42, and his series kept on going.
Yeah.
And he was in publication for ages, because as well as Dollman, his own series, he was also in feature comics as well.
Yeah.
So he ran for years, whereas the Atom is, every now and then they try and do a new Atom series and it barely lasts, 18 issues if you're lucky?
Yeah, I mean, the original series lasted a good long while, but then obviously merged with Hawkman and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And, Al Pratt had a reasonable sort of career. He lasted to the end of the Justice Society America publications, but he was just a little fighting guy, not a shrinking sort of hero.
And he never had his own title either.
Yeah, and the thing, as I said in the past, when we first did a story with Dollman, I've got very clear memories in the mid-70s seeing Dollman comics on sale somewhere when we were on holiday down south. So, I mean, longevity is definitely a thing. And I'm sure, I can't remember when this was exactly, but I think it was in the 90s or maybe the 2000s, a company called Full Moon Comics, which had a character which they referred to, I think it's Charles Band's Dollman.
I think it ties into the Dollman movies that were out around about then.
Ah.
Yeah, because Tim Thomerson, I believe, played him. He also played Jack Death in Trancers.
Right.
So they might have the rights to that.
I've seen Trancers, yeah.
I love Trancers, it's great fun. The 10-second delay watch and everything.
A long time ago I saw it. I remember it had the line, he was a great cop till a trancer killed his wife. Something like that. So, I mean, Dollman as a name has been around for quite a while, I suppose.
Yes.
And obviously he's been sporadically used in the Freedom Fighters and stuff in DC, and we will be beginning our own coverage of the Freedom Fighters on the Earth 2 podcast within the next few months.
We most certainly shall, yes. Also, there's the UK Dollman, House of Dollman.
Of course.
Yes, which is spelled Dollmann.
Well spotted. I got the hardcover collection of that very recently from Rebellion Comics from the sale. So what's the website again? treasurybritishcomics.com, something like that.
Yep, that sounds about right.
If you just Google Rebellion British Comics, listeners, you can find out the absolute treasure trove that's available there.
There's no correspondence, sadly, for any of these stories, so I think that kind of wraps it up for our first foray into JSApril.
Absolutely. So far we've covered then the Atom, the Sandman, and the Spectre. Slightly.
From a certain point of view.
Yes. Listeners, if you're joining us for the first time, thank you. I hope we've encouraged you enough to come back and listen to the rest of our JSApril episodes. If you're just finding us for the first time, we have over 250 episodes for you to delve back into. The mission statement of this podcast is to explore the pre-crisis DC Comics multiverse with an emphasis on the legacy of the Golden Age heroes. We are quite a way into it. We've quite a way to go. Plenty of good stuff we've covered, plenty of good stuff to come. Hopefully you'll stick with us.
Indeed. If you want to write to us and tell us what you think about this episode, you can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media because we're putting up some lovely bonus material, including the full Dollman story, because as I said, it is public domain. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth 2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it's the number 2 for all of our socials.
Yeah. If you're enjoying the show, please consider going to wherever it is you receive your podcast and leaving us a positive review, or you could find our Linktree page, find our coffee page from that, and maybe buy Peter the price of a beverage. So who are the next 3 heroes we're going to meet next week's episode then, Peter?
You'll have to tune in and find out.
Well, there you go then. Listeners, maybe have a look at your copy of All-Star Comics number 3 and you can really work out, maybe have a guess at who's in next week's episode. Our thanks again to the irredeemable Shag for getting us involved. It's a lot of fun putting these episodes together.
It certainly is. And we might even have some guests on next week. You'll have to tune in and find out. On that bombshell, I've been Peter.
I've been David. Take care, folks. Enjoy JSApril. We'll see you next time on
the Earth 2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
I pulled off my ink-stained shoes. Pull off your ink-stained shoes.
I don't know that song.
I just wrote it there.
All right, stash that numbers receipt under the rug. Write that one.